Welcome everybody to Wednesday Wind Down webinar with Dan and Friends. This is the webinar that I gotta turn off the chat. The webinar and YouTube show for folks that like to be outdoors. People like to get together with friends, maybe drink, maybe talk bullshit and talk about other stuff. So we're going to do that tonight. So I'm Dan Conger, the host. He, him are my pronouns. And Doug, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Doug Grover, he, him, American whiskey.
Okay. I'm drinking Bullet tonight. I'm out of my makers, so I'm drinking my daughter's Bullet. So, yes. So tonight we're going to talk about group food. Doug, you could use this moment to cue up the slideshow. Talking about group food, and what's kind of unique about this for me is the last time I did group food was probably when I was 13 years old in the Boy Scouts, and I haven't done group food since. I'm always so used to doing Dan Conger's food, and here's my food, and I hope you brought something, because if you didn't, I'll share with you, but I'm going to make my food that I want to make, and you're going to have your food that you want to make. So Doug's done a fair amount of group meals, and we thought this would be a great thing to kind of just explore and have a conversation about it. So what
I've been on a lot of trips with a lot of the people who are listening right now, and most of those trips, everybody has their own food. I had my own food for many, many years backpacking, and about 10 years ago, I started backpacking with a couple of groups of folks, and we started doing group food. And it started out being a little bit. Now it basically once a year, there are 4 or 5, 6 of us get together, and we have a cooked dinner and a cooked lunch, and we're sharing all of that. We don't share breakfast because that's, a lot of times people want a big breakfast and some people want a small one.
Sure. Now I'm noticing right above your thigh to the left of those 2 Nalgene's, there's a flask. So I want to know, is alcohol shared too, or is that bring your own?
Everybody brings their own.
Okay, smart move.
And
okay. So,
I will freely admit that we bring more than we should, but of course we consume all of it.
Oh, of course. Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to start off with the question that needs to be asked. Why are you doing group food? It sounds like it adds, I don't want to say difficulty, but it's another layer to the trip. So why do you do that?
Well, I think over time I've found that group food tends to be a little more social. So if it's a bunch of friends I'm going backpacking with regularly, it's like one focal point, which is one stove, as opposed to everybody having their own stove. I think the group food, where you have a collection of pots that everybody shares, allows you to do a little more complicated food on the trail.
Sure.
And lastly, I think you can save some money if you do group food. Certainly if you do group food the way the groups that I'm in typically do group food.
Okay. So I noticed earlier before we got started, you've got 4 canisters, and those are not the small canisters. Those are not the medium canisters. Those are the Mongo canisters. So how long are you going to be out for? And how many people are on this trip? So
this is a trip with 5 people, and we're out for 8 days.
Okay.
So I will freely admit that an extra canister is, I think, my luxury item.
Well, actually, there's another canister in the foreground. You've got 5 canisters going there. So
yeah, we had everybody carried a canister. I'm not sure they were all 5 were full, but 4 of them were full at the beginning of the trip.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk about the trips that you do this on. So if you're on a trip that you're trying to make miles, are you going to do group meals, or are these going to be on trips that are maybe a little more leisurely, or where do you find yourself gravitating toward group meals, or do you do group meals all the time?
So there are several challenges with group meals. The very first one is everybody has to want to eat the same food.
Mm-hmm.
But the second one, to your point, everybody needs to eat together at the same time. And that likely means everybody needs to hike together. So if I was on a trip where miles were important, or where there's a chance somebody's going to bail on the trip, then I would probably not do group food. So the group food trips probably don't have a lot of miles, because you want to make sure that everybody is able to hike together.
So that could be a real drag if somebody had to bail or bailed because they just didn't like it, and they either leave with Tuesday's dinner, or they're not, they leave with the communal cooking pot, or something else that just throws a wrinkle in it, or you got to carry the food that nobody else is going to eat, or you're going to eat to get fat. So okay.
Oh yeah. But the other thing, and I think it was mentioned on the previous show that you did, nobody loses weight on my trips.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's take a look at some of the gear that you use for these. Okay.
Before we do that, let me mention one last consequence of group food, because you mentioned something related to this earlier. On the trips where I do group food, we have to be very careful about hygiene with respect to food. So avoid contamination. One of the strategies that I use on these group meal trips is we use boiling water to sterilize all food items after the meal. That may be one of the reasons why we have more fuel than people are thinking we'd need.
So if I'm just licking my spoon and my cup clean, that's fine for me. Maybe rinse some lukewarm water in there. But if somebody else is going to be doing that, or I did say the other one is if your hand is going to be potentially closer in the pot or touching utensil. Yeah. Sanitation is got to be an important thing. I mean, you could have gastrointestinal distress for the entire group like that. That would not be fun.
Some things are not to be shared.
Agreed.
Okay. So here's a typical dinner. This is at Clear Creek in the Grand Canyon. And this is a simplified version of the cooking setup. So for up to 6 people, I would have one 4-liter pot, one 2-liter pot. Those are primarily used for cooking. And then I would have 2 additional pots that are used for dry baking. And I've tried this before where I try to have the pots for dry baking to be also used for the meal. So you cook a muffin before the meal or cook the muffin after the meal. Either the muffin is not warm when you eat it, or dinner just takes way too long. Mm-hmm. Second thing is when you're with a big group of people, a 1.3-liter pot, which is the size of those baking pots, that's really not enough for food. You need a bigger pot than that.
Right. Well, something that I just noticed right now is those kind of look like some old school Boy Scout pots, but those are just aluminum. There's no titanium on those big ones. So you're definitely, I mean, you might be able to find a titanium pot that big, but you're going to pay some serious coin for that. So you're going to go for some old school aluminum.
Oh, aluminum works just fine. I mean, I'll admit I'm a little disappointed with the titanium cookware. I wish that everything that Evernew did came both coated and non-coated. And everything above 1.3 liters is coated, and I don't like that.
Yeah. Okay. So this is your core kit. So we've got the 2 pots on the left, the Boy Scout pots, but so the 2 pots on the right with the red handles and the felt lids. What's that about? What's that for?
That's for baking.
Baking.
And I've got some photos for that later.
But we aren't talking easy bake oven though.
Oh, no.
Okay. Cool.
So one additional comment here is you'll notice there's a cozy around that 2-liter pot. Mm-hmm. So typically, almost all meals can be cooked with a single stove, and something can be done in the small pot, and then you can let it cook by steeping, and that's what the cozy is for.
Good. That's a great way to conserve fuel too, and to be doing multiple things at once. Good call.
So now I've got some photos with respect to food. So the first comment I want to make with food is that there are 2 kinds of food that I typically use on these group meal trips. The first column are food items that you would make at home. And typically it's a food item that you would normally eat at home, not something that you plan on making only in the backcountry. So if you have a chili that you like eating at home, I say make the same chili, dehydrate it, take it on the trail.
Good call.
So all 5 of those food items are ones this standard group of friends and I have on every single trip. And it's all favorite food items at home that we take on the trail.
And then I'll add to that, if you're going to dehydrate it, you could dehydrate that into single serving if you aren't going to be doing group food. Because I do exactly that with some of those same things. I will take I might even take the leftover portion from dinner and dehydrate that. and that's coming on my next trip. So that's an excellent strategy. But certainly the familiarity is there, right? You know what this is like. There's no surprises to your stomach.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so that the first column is ones that you'd make and dehydrate, and then what's the second column? The shepherd's pie column.
So the second column are items where you buy the components in the store and you would cook them on the trail. Some of the components might be just you take them on the trail the same way you buy them from the store. Some of them might have a bunch of water in them, and so you'd need to dehydrate those items. But you would dehydrate them, and then the assembly into a single meal would be done on the trail.
So again, another valid food strategy to kind of wean yourself off of dehydrated meals is to do exactly that. Find off-the-shelf things, modify them, or repackage them, and then use the components. So like an example that I use instant rice all the time, right? I just buy that off the shelf, and that's one of the starches that I use. So
I love instant rice and couscous, and even the longer ones like pastas that have to cook 10 minutes or so. If I've got a big enough group of people, that's a huge pot. The thermal mass in that pot will just cook it. You get it boiling, you boil it for like a minute, and then you just let it sit until the pasta's done. It's pretty easy.
Okay, cool. So those are some dinner examples. How do you deal with breakfast? You mentioned that earlier on the pre-show.
Breakfast, everybody brings their own. Typically, it's something that you would either add cold water to or add hot water to. So typically on these trips, it's just boiling water that gets added to whatever anybody's doing in their own personal cook kit.
Okay, awesome.
So the second column of assemble or cook on the trail, I've got a couple of examples of that, the last three on this list. So here is mac and cheese with pepperoni and peas. So the frozen peas would be dehydrated at home. Flavored rice with vegetables and chicken, and both the chicken and the vegetables would be dehydrated at home. And then kind of the most complicated meal that I do is stuffing. So that's an off-the-shelf stuffing mix with chicken that I would dehydrate, a gravy mix, cranberries, slivered almonds, and again, vegetables that I would dehydrate at home.
So a question for you. I do a lot of dehydrating on my food. I have never dehydrated frozen vegetables. Seems to work pretty well for you.
It's the best way.
Ah, okay.
That they rehydrate better than any other form of vegetable you can.
Because I've had a real challenge with corn is a prime example. Is rehydrating corn is really tough. Freeze-dried corn rehydrates really well, but not. And then the canned chicken breast, I've dehydrated that, and that works really well. And I dry it with the juice as well, right? It's all that flavor stays in there. I don't drain any of it. You just need to make sure you have a parchment paper so it doesn't run off. Rob asked a question about the veggies. You're going to just dehydrate them straight from frozen. You're just going to put them on the tray and dehydrate them. Is that correct?
They are still frozen on the dehydrator tray when I turn the dehydrator on.
Okay.
I think the magic is that when they're frozen, the process of freezing them blanches them, and that's why they dehydrate and rehydrate well.
Okay. Good. Okay, well, I'm glad I had dinner already because it's like kind of interesting. I could go for some of this stuff. Okay, cool.
So these are three meals in terms of the items I would buy in the store, but I'm not going to take them in this form. So these are the same three meals packaged for the trail. Mm-hmm. And they're sorted in terms of the order in which I'd put them in the pot. So the top meal is the stuffing, and I would take the chicken and vegetables and throw them in the pot with enough water to get them rehydrated and boil it for a little period of time, and then just let it steep just to get the water into those vegetables. Mm-hmm. Eventually, the vegetables are reasonably soft, and then I would add the cranberries and almonds and the gravy mix. Sometimes I've cooked the gravy mix in a separate pot, but if it tastes okay and comes out okay in this pot, that's easier. It's one less thing to clean up.
Sure. Okay.
And with stuffing, right at the very end, you just shove in the stuffing into the pot, and as soon as it's got moisture into the breadcrumbs, then it's ready to eat. And you notice in the lower left-hand corner, I included the little 2-liter pot. So especially for the stuffing, but also for other meals, while I'm cooking in the big pot, I probably have really hot water that I've put in that small pot, so that as I'm mixing the meal together, if I need any more water, at least I've got hot water that I can add to the big pot.
Which that's another technique, right? If you're making something and you think you've got the right amount of water, you put it in there, like, oh, that's still too dry. You can add more in, and if it's already hot, that's good. Then there's the Andrew Skrika method, and he makes everything soupy on purpose. He says it goes down easier, and which there is something to that. You just got to get used to it. So I'm going to use this moment to interject to say we're halfway through. So that's a good reminder for Doug, and it looks like we're right on track. And for everybody else that's listening tonight, is if you have any questions for Doug, throw me either in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll catch them towards the end. So we'll save a little bit of time for those at the end. Okay, so we've got the stuffing / Thanksgiving dinner at the top, and then what's that middle meal?
So the middle one is the flavored rice with chicken and vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the dehydrated chicken and vegetables will take some time to get rehydrated. So I get them in the pot, get hot water in it, boil it a little bit of time. I might, as the water cools down, if they're still not saturated enough, I might reboil the water with them in there. And once they're sufficiently soft, then I'll go ahead and add the rice, probably boil it for a minute, and then just let the rice steep to finish its cooking.
Okay. And do you just use that one long handle spoon for mixing and serving? Is that you just use the one, or do you have a larger serving? Okay.
And again, that's a hygiene thing. Everybody has their own eating implement. I want to have a different implement that's used to serve up the food to each person.
Okay. Good call. And then what do we got on the bottom row? I see some green things and some noodles and...
Well, the bottom row is the mac and cheese.
Oh, yeah.
Again, it's not really cheese. It's whatever is powdered, and real cheese is never powdered. Well, I suppose Parmesan cheese can be powdered, but the yellow stuff that comes out of that package, that's not cheese.
Oh, but hey, when I take Parmesan cheese backpacking, I take the sawdust stuff out of the green shaker bottle. I have some in the fridge just for backpacking purposes, and it tastes like Parmesan, even though it's got sawdust in it. So, but.
So yeah, and the story with the mac and cheese is similar. Like, get the peas somewhat rehydrated, add the noodles, let them cook. Then for this case, you have to pour the excess water off, and then add the cheese and the pepperonis at the end.
Okay, cool.
And just one comment in terms of, we mentioned earlier, in terms of dinner versus lunch. So typically on the trips I'm on, lunch is probably on the trail somewhere. And it's probably not near any water, because typically I'm doing these trips in a desert environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So lunches tend to be a single pot meal, whereas dinners tend to be a multiple pot meal, because dinners will tend to be at a place where there's water and it's easier to clean up.
Okay.
So now let's talk about dry baking.
Yes, baking.
So when I first started dry baking, got turned on to it by Jim Kurtz, and I did it solo. And it's just as much effort to bake for one person as it is to bake for 6 people. And so I'm willing to put in the extra effort for a lot of people. I tend to not bake on solo trips anymore, just because it's so tedious.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do for baking is, I found these wonderful off-the-shelf products that require adding water. You don't have to add egg. You don't have to add oil. Just add water and bake it. And I've done other things. I've done those other products that require extra items. I've been on trips where we made a baking mix at home. And
wow.
that was a trip where somebody had some kind of allergy to some food product. And so they made all the baking mixes.
Okay, so you could use these packaged ones to just add water. Okay, and you're just finding that at your local grocery store or wherever.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's convenient.
So now we got some pictures to talk about with this process.
Mm-hmm.
So these pictures go clockwise. take the muffin mix and just add the water and stir the water inside of the package that came from the store.
Or just mix in the package. Sure.
In the package. I've tried it I tried it other ways, and that just means there's something else you have to clean up. Mm-hmm. So this is less cleanup. So this baking outfit is manufactured by Flat Cat Gear. Anybody who's interested in dry baking, I recommend they go look it up, flatcatgear.com. So the baking of this 6 muffin package will fill up a 5-inch round baking pan. So I put a parchment sheet in the bottom of that baking pan, and then just squeeze the wet muffin mix into the pan. Put the pan.
And you don't oil or anything. You don't necessarily have any problem with any sticking on the edge for the most part.
Well, John at Flat Cat Gear, in all of his videos, he talks about putting oil in his pans. And I did that for a couple of years until I was on a trip when I ran out of oil. And then I discovered it works just as well without oil, and that's less mess.
Agree. Okay, I like that. So the parchment on the bottom to stop it from sticking, and that's where it's getting the heat. So that's a little bit of a buffer too. So okay, I can appreciate that.
And it just goes in this little 1.3 liter pot. It's important that the pot not be ceramic coated. And then this baking process uses Esbit tablets, although you can cook on top of a remote canister stove. In this case, there's a little stove that goes around the outside of the Esbit tablet to control how much it burns. So I light it with the scalloping on this stove down to get airflow around the tablet. Once the tablet is burning, I flip it over so the smooth side is down next to the ground, and that reduces the amount of airflow that the tablet gets, and that limits limits how fast it burns, and therefore it increases the burn time for the tablet.
So it lowers the heat and increases the time. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're trying to get a nice even heat for a longer period of time, as opposed to a canister stove like a pocket rocket, right? That's just the blowtorch that's would burn the snot out of the bottom, and the top would be raw. So you want to try and get it as even as possible. And I guess that's also the concept on the double, is you have an air cushion in there and it turns it into more of an oven.
Yeah. Okay. So I take no credit. Somebody invented all of the stuff and figured out what worked, and I say thank you, and I just use it. So then you take the lid for the pot, and there's this insulating carbon felt lid, additional insulating material that goes on top to kind of hold the heat in. Put that pot on the very top of the windscreen. The flange for the pot will hold the pot from falling down inside. Put it there, just let it go. Don't open up the lid. That, just like with baking at home, that reduces heat on the inside. For these muffin mixes, I just let it go until the tablet burns out.
Okay. And so, question for you: did you get the stove, the windscreen, the pot, and the felt lid all together, all from Flat Cat Gear?
Yes, I did. And there's a picture of all of this stuff in a couple slides.
Okay, beautiful.
So this is the second half of the process, which is what happens when the baking is done. So here you can see that the top of the muffin hasn't turned brown. That's because the heat is on the bottom of that thick-walled aluminum baking pan, and then it goes up the edge of the pan. So the bottom and the edges of that muffin will be browned, but not the top.
Okay, so I thought about this when I saw this slide earlier in the pre-show, is that first image in the upper left looks like a berry cheesecake to me. And that is like, I would strangle someone to have that on the trail, a berry cheesecake on the trail. That's one of my weaknesses. But you know what would totally put this over the cliff is if you had a warm berry compote. If you had like cooked some freeze-dried or just rehydrated some freeze-dried berries and that'd be so good. But to be honest,
that's way better than the desserts I eat at home.
But to be honest, anything bready or cakey on the trail is a treasure in itself. Anything that's not a granola bar, it's like, what is this wonderful thing in my mouth?
Yeah, and eat it warm. So as soon as it finishes baking, divvy it up and give it to people, because warm bread items, whether at home or on the trail, warm things always taste better. So I use a plastic knife, not a metal knife, to ensure that the edge of the muffin is separated from the pan. I don't like metal because it might scratch the pan. And then just flip it upside down into a bowl.
Okay, so Doug, we got about 5 minutes left, so let's go. Let's save a couple minutes for question and answer at the end. So, well, I know we've got time for a couple more. So, last chance to start throwing some questions for Doug in the Q&A. So please throw them in there. Okay, so what else we got time for?
Okay, we've got a quick couple of slides. So this is the slide of the material we saw before, and I got the pot and the stove and the windscreen and the remote canister stove and those little metal stakes and the little round aluminum circle, metal insulating circle, and the diffusion plate. All of those baking items I got from Flat Cat Gear.
Okay. And then I'm going to guess that lower corner where the berry is, that's one of your consumables.
Yeah, those are consumables, and the other side of the screen are the baking items that I don't always use. So you can cook with a remote canister stove, and I have done that. But you can end up with too much heat, and that creates problems. The Esbit tablet works really well. So this is basically cooking the remote canister stove as kind of emergency backup.
Okay, good.
So here's the full kit, where on the left-hand side of the dash line would be the components I'd take for a three-person trip, where I've got one baking kit and a 2-liter pot for cooking. And I have cozies for both of those. If I go to 6 people, I'm going to add a 4-liter pot, and I'm going to add a second baking outfit. And of course, more fuel, because more people needs more fuel.
Right.
So then just to finish it off, we've got a couple. Here we've got the thing packs down. Again, all the small pots have their own little cozies. And the long handled items that don't fit in the pots, I just put them in a Ziploc bag with the bowl and my personal cup that I eat out of. And
I got to imagine that the long lighter's got to be nice working with the Esbit, especially trying to reach in the heat shield.
I don't know how many trips I tried to use a big lighter, and the Esbit tablets are really hard to light, but they cannot resist the long handled lighter.
True.
And then here we've got a couple of eating photos. So this is Clear Creek, halfway down to the Colorado River, where we're having mac and cheese for lunch. This is Tanner Rapids, where we got into camp for lunch, so we didn't have to eat lunch on the trail. And that gave us a luxury of being able to bake a muffin at lunch.
Wow. Okay. And
then kind of the ultimate backcountry group meal trip would be Phantom Ranch Cantina, where they cook everything for you. And in addition, they have fresh greens.
I see a salad there. Right. That's pretty incredible. Okay. So I have a couple questions, and we have a couple questions that popped in. So one was more about dehydrating. Have you ever tried frozen berries or dehydrated frozen berries? And I haven't. Have you ever messed around with that?
I have never done that.
That would be an interesting thing to do. Now, however, I have found that freeze-dried berries you can get in Target from their snack thing. So you can get a small packet of them for a couple of bucks or $1.50, whatever it is. And I can get, maybe a cup of dehydrated berries, different kinds of berries. And for backpacking, that works really well, because I have found a breakfast that uses, that I'm kind of hot on right now, that uses granola, just granola nuts, maybe some seeds, a little bit of sugar, and then you do the berries. You just rehydrate them in warm water and mix them together, and it's kind of a compote granola. I'm kind of hot on that right now. So, but it might be interesting to try that.
Berries have a structure that I don't think you can won't rehydrate. So I think if you really wanted berries, you'd have to go with freeze-dried. Freeze-dried,
right?
I'm sure somebody out there in the world has said, "Yeah, I do it all the time and it works." But
and then a home freeze dryer is going to be crazy expensive. And then another one. It was about we got to give our kudos to Jim Kurtz. And you already did. Everything that I have. I'm going to just say this publicly. Everything that I have ever mocked Jim Kurtz about, I have come to embrace.
Jim is a guy who every time something new comes out, he has to go try it for himself. And so why should I trust a random person out on YouTube? Because I know Jim, so I'll just talk to him.
Right on. And then I had a question on the cleanup. How do you kind of work the camp chores, right? So we've got the food prep, we've got fetch and water, and we got cleanup. Those are the three big ones that I'm thinking of. How do you kind of farm that out in a group meal setup?
I'm assuming each group has to come up with their own answer. In the groups that I've been in, most of the meals, I'm the guy who does the trail cooking. And so other people, they chip in and they'll do the cleanup after dinner.
Yeah. Because that's definitely one of our house rules is my wife and I alternate making dinner, and whoever makes dinner doesn't clean up, doesn't clear, right? It's always that way. I made the big mess in the kitchen, it's your turn to clean up, or vice versa. So yeah, that's always a good rule. And then I think the last one I kind of want to leave with is actually a question popped up that's worth asking too, is I know you don't carry all that gear. I know you farm that out. Is that's you try and distribute that as evenly as you can. That's got to be the case, right? There's no way you could carry all that gear.
Yeah, you got to farm it out. Now, all of that, if you ignore the fuel canister. So in general, everybody carries a fuel canister or no fuel canister, but nobody's carrying multiple fuel canisters.
Right.
Those are more heavy. So all of that stuff, if you consider all those pots, and especially even if you carry two of those little stoves, that stuff is still like 4 and a fraction pounds for all of that, including like the lighter and everything. So that's not a massive amount of weight.
So if someone was to put their toe in the water, would you recommend, if you had to said, pick one or the other, because you're doing group food and baking, would you suggest someone try baking for a group or doing group meals first? Which, if you had a suggestion?
I think I would suggest doing the group food first before doing the baking.
Okay.
But if you do that, I would recommend getting the components that you would need for baking, because if you're going to be with 2 or 3 people, you're going to want to have one of those little baking pots.
Okay. Awesome.
Anyway. Okay.
Well, you spent a half an hour with us, so I'm glad that Doug, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. I always appreciate that people come back for more. It tells me that we're doing something right. Next week, we've got a new topic. We're going to be talking about PLBs, personal locator beacons, PLBs versus satellite messengers. We're going to talk about pros and cons and where those kind of fit into the landscape, so to speak. And of course, we got Jim Kurtz on the satellite messenger side, and I'm on the PLB side. And we have different reasons why we each came to those. And it'll be kind of interesting. That'll be a really good one to get some of your feedback and some of your questions as you're watching. So looking forward to that. Thanks again, Doug. We appreciate your time.
Oh, always a good time.
Okay. Have a great week, everybody. Hope to see you on the trail.